Well, it's always great to have a flower farmer on. I always enjoy these times, but I'm really excited because this flower farmer is on the other side of the border, all the way from Canada. I'm excited. Welcome, Melanie, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am so thrilled because, we get a lot of questions and people writing into us saying, we wish we had some farmers from up north because of the challenges you
Mhm.
face and deal with that some of my more southern neighbors down here don't have to deal with. And I think there's pros and cons to both. And so I do like to
For
kind of get,
sure.
get the other perspective on this. And also suggestions because of so many people that are just like where you're at. And so I would love if you could start by just kind of sharing how you got into the flower business, how you became a flower child, and love to hear your story.
Absolutely. So I sort of accidentally started in the flower business at a young age. I grew up on the farm that we're farming right now with my mom and dad, and my parents did market gardening. So they grew just over an acre of produce and they sold it at the local farmers markets. And within that produce, they always planted plenty of flowers. So when I was a kid, it was my job to get out there and help harvest. And I helped my dad harvest the flowers. He would set up the truck with the tailgate down. He would put me up on a milk crate so that I could help arrange the flowers on the back of the tailgate. And that kind of got me hooked from a really young age. So I grew up doing that kind of thing. We ended up stopping farming when I was about 8 years old or so, but I just never lost my love of farming. So I took a little detour. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I grew up. I went to school for horticulture. I ended up doing a work placement in high school at a local garden center and just totally fell in love with it. Took horticulture in college, and then I ended up taking floral design in college as well. I always
Oh,
loved
really?
art. Yeah, so I took floral design and was kind of trying to figure out a way to combine the two. I ended up working in flower shops for about 8 years full time as a designer, but I just really missed farm life. I missed the tangible growing something and using that product that I grew up with. And got a little burnt out sort of from the retail floral industry, just unpacking the same case of carnations every single week, week after week,
Sure.
52 weeks a year. So at that point, I ended up leaving my job at the flower shop. Wasn't sure what that was going to look like for me, but I knew that I knew how to grow things. So I went back to the family farm. I ended up planting just a few. Um, I ended up planting a few crops here at the family farm and thought I would just sell them at the local farmers market, which is the same farmers market that I had been vending at with my parents as a kid.
Amazing.
Thought I would just give that a go and see where it took me. And it sort of took off. It's went from vending at a farmer's market a few days a week to a full farm store here at our farm and a full farming operation.
Wow. I mean, so you probably never thought once you got out of school like you'd ever go back to that, did you? I mean, was that something in the back of your mind? You thought, okay, I have a fallback plan, or were you,
No,
yeah.
no, definitely not. My original plan was to open up a traditional retail flower shop. And after working in them for 8 years and after having kind of gone to school for floral design, that was still the original plan. And I had a business plan all set up to do it. But at the time, my mom was sick
Mm.
and my husband's father was not doing well at the time. And it just didn't seem like the right time to start a bricks and mortar location. So farming was kind of an accident. It was just that crossroad in my life where it wasn't the right time to do a bricks and mortar retail shop. I thought I need to do something right now. So I thought, well, let's just plant some crops and see what happens. And it sort of really just evolved from there and ended up being just wildly more thrilling than any of the work that I've done in retail flower shops.
Oh, it's so cool. I'm just curious, like when you were a little girl and
Mhm.
and you were helping with flowers and the family farm, what flowers were they growing then?
We grew a lot of the basics. We grew lots of snapdragons, we grew lots of zinnias, we grew asters, and we grew dahlias, and that was about it. And sunflowers.
Okay.
Yeah, so
So it
just like
wasn't
the good
just,
old staples.
yeah, so but it wasn't just like a random mix. It was staples and it was things that did well up there. And
For sure.
I always get curious because looking back at the progression of flower farming, because we used to have so many here in the States, especially, used to have all these
Hmm.
greenhouses that grew so much before all
Hmm.
that got exported down south, South America. And then now, as people have been building back over the last, what, I don't know, maybe 30 years. And
Yeah.
really that momentum has been growing. I'm just curious the difference sometimes. So, how much land do you grow on?
We farm on a 5 acre plot of land. We're actively farming about 3 acres right now.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
And how many different flowers do you usually grow?
We grow between 15 and 20 different varieties, different crops right now. And then
Mhm.
within those crops, then countless different varieties. When I first started out, I went through a little bit of a phase of let's grow everything. And I tried growing,
Yeah.
100 different varieties. And I quickly learned that it's really hard to grow 100 things exceptionally well. It's better to narrow it down and pick maybe a dozen things and grow those really well and do lots of different varieties within that than it is to maybe try to do 100 different things.
Sure.
So
So,
we've sort of specialized from there.
which makes perfect sense because it's definitely better to produce a higher quality of what you do grow than be spread too thin. Now, to
For
give
sure.
people a perspective, I know I mentioned at the beginning that you're from Canada, but where in Canada are you located?
We are located in southern Ontario. So just pretty close to Lake Ontario.
Okay. And so, what is the normal growing season like? Because I know so many of the people
Mhm.
we've interviewed, their seasons are either, buffeted. Is that the right word? I don't know. It's you have the climate from the ocean that kind of helps, buffet the season, making it longer.
For sure.
Oh, I got to tickle all some, and we'll edit that out. And um, But then, of course, down here we don't have that issue. So where you're located, what is the actual growing season?
Our growing season is usually from around May long weekend right through till often the first weekend of October. So we get some pretty late frosts here in Ontario. We like to start our things kind of like late March, early April. It's usually relatively cool in the spring here, but it gets hot quickly. So we usually wait till end of May to plant anything that's tender outside because it seems like we'll always get this little period where we get this beautiful lull of weather in May and then we get that hard frost right at the end of May that gets us every time. So we're learning to be a little more cautious here in Ontario. So we don't
Yeah,
plant anything too tender out till the end of May, and then our growing season used to be until about the 1st of October, although nature is full of surprises. And this year we had a killing frost in the middle of September
oh
here in
wow.
Ontario. Yeah. So it was about 3 weeks earlier than it normally would be. And mid September, when our crops were just at their peak and we had 3 acres of stunning field grown flowers, we had a super hard freeze this year that took everything out, and then we had beautiful weather right through till middle of October.
How frustrating.
So yeah, so it can be a real gamble. So we count on end of May right through till beginning of October if all things go well.
Well, I have a ton of questions I want to ask, and I'm just thinking to myself, after hearing that, um, I want to talk about COVID and things how you've pivoted, but I also want to kind
Sure.
of get an idea of what's normal. I know one of the questions that we receive a lot is about how to extend seasons or how to find ways to be, revenue producing, especially after you get a killing frost like that. What options are there? And I know every business model is different, so I'm curious how you
Hmm.
approach that. So maybe let's start with this. Do you grow anything under any kind of protection, whether it's a high tunnel or a greenhouse or anything like that, or is everything open field?
We do have some high tunnels. So we don't have any heated greenhouses here at the farm, but we do have two unheated high tunnels that we've been growing crops in. And interestingly, we're investing in more of those after we
Okay.
had that issue of the freeze that happened so early last year. So normally in our two high tunnels, we'll grow crops that need a little bit of extra warmth. We've been growing eucalyptus in our high tunnels over
Really?
the last, yeah, over the last couple of years. There's been such a high demand for eucalyptus in weddings and just lots of people wanting to buy it just for decor. So we've actually dedicated the high tunnels to that because it's a crop that does need that extra heat and does need a little bit of a longer season. So we've been doing that in our high tunnels and then growing everything else we grow out in an open field. But this year we're making a little bit of an adjustment. We had such a
Okay.
loss last year when we had that big frost in mid-September that we've purchased an extra 30-foot by 100-foot high tunnel. And we are going to be growing the majority of our dahlias in there this year because we found that last year when we had that big frost, we did some frost covering and we managed to save maybe a third of our dahlia patch, and they produced beautifully for another 5 weeks after that frost. So our hope this year is to extend the high tunnel production, move a lot of the dahlias in there. That way we have the additional protection and we can keep that crop growing.
Okay, so two questions.
Yeah.
One, where do you get your high tunnels?
We get them from Decluit, which is a manufacturer here in Ontario. They are amazing.
Okay.
We've been using them for a couple of years now. And then they actually recommended an installer to us. And we
Okay.
have that installation company come and set up the high tunnels,
Okay.
which has been fantastic.
Well, I mean, that's great because then you can still focus on what you need to do in your, of course, this time of year, I don't know.
Totally.
So, okay, so this is where I frustrate our editing team because I have so many questions in my head. I'm going to try to stay focused here. So,
Okay.
how long does it take for you to recover the cost of that? Because I mean, like you're saving 5 weeks, possibly in
That's
dahlia
right.
production at the end, and maybe you can start some things in there on the early side.
Mhm.
Because again, thinking about season extension, how long does it take for you to really pay for that tunnel? Because does it take a few years or is it
Our goal is to pay our high tunnel back in the first year of
okay?
production, and I believe it will. We grow about 5,000 dahlias a year here. So it's a
Okay.
pretty large crop for us. And we're looking actually to expand to about 10,000 this year, which seems like a little
Wow.
ambitious, but that's the plan. So the plan is that it will recover in the first year. After we had that frost, the portion of the dahlias that we were able to save that were still blooming, we were cutting buckets and buckets per day off of that patch just because they were blooming so prolifically. So, and as I was cutting the buckets and kind of adding up the costs, and I was
Okay.
thinking, well, if this is a third of the patch,
Okay.
imagine what we would be producing in a crop if we had the full patch. So, with our estimation, it should be within the first year that we'll earn the money back for the high tunnel, maybe a year and a half at the most.
Yeah, well, that's a no-brainer then. I mean, that's not, I mean,
Totally. It
that makes so much sense. I'm
it
excited
felt
for
like
you.
for me that the loss of that crop this year would, I mean, the money in revenue lost would easily pay for a brand new high tunnel.
Sure.
So
And
we're
then you never
excited. This will
know.
be our first year.
Right, and you never know. It's like even if
Totally.
you had a slight frost that would have hit them back, you don't have any of that recovery time. It just keeps on producing. So,
That's right. And that's the hard part
yeah,
about farming is that any mistakes or things that happen, you really can't fix it for another year
right,
whenever anything goes wrong.
right.
You just have to kind of wait a year and then try again.
Uh,
So we've waited a year, we've put up the high tunnel, and then we'll see what happens this year.
yeah, incredible. Okay, so I should have asked this at the beginning. Where did you get the name? I mean, Dahlia May Flower Farm.
I love this story.
Okay,
So I farm on two pieces of land. One
okay,
piece is the land that I live on, that my farmhouse is on, and my retail farm store is on. And then the second piece of land is about a kilometer away, and it's a larger piece of property. So we grow crops on both of those pieces of property. So one of the pieces of property used to belong to my parents, who have both passed away. And the second piece of property used to belong to my grandmother, who has also passed away. So my grandmother's name was Kathleen May. So we get the May from her for
Okay.
that piece of property. And then my dad used to always call my mom by his favorite flower names when I was a kid, and he loved dahlias. So he used to always call my mom Dahlia. So I grew up hearing her called Dahlia all the time. So I chose Dahlia for my mom for this piece of property, and then May for Kathleen May, my grandmother, for the other piece of property. So it
How
felt like it kind
fun.
of tied it all in. Yeah,
Yeah, that's special. And that's sort of a neat way to remember them. And especially since you
for
had that
sure.
connection to the land and to the flowers and all that too. So what a
Absolutely.
great way to honor them too. Um, okay, so I know we were talking about dahlias, and I am curious, how do you overwinter the dahlias? And then when do you start
Right.
them back? Now that you have high tunnels, do you get to kind of skip and maybe start them a little earlier or
Yeah, dahlias are a big process for us. So once our dahlia season is finished in the fall, here in Ontario, we're a zone 5. So we're not able to overwinter them in the ground. I know I think in the US, warmer zones, kind of 7 and 8 and up, can leave their tubers in the ground.
Mhm.
We're not able to do that here in Ontario. So we dig up all of the dahlias, we take the tubers, and we store them in black plastic bulb crates that we got from our suppliers, and we pack them in peat moss. So we just take the tubers, we don't rinse them off or anything. We leave them nice and dirty, kind of like you would a potato if you were storing a
Sure.
potato over the winter. We leave them dirty, put them in the peat moss, pack them all in, and then we stack them up on skids. And we actually put them in the basement of my farmhouse right now. So, in an ideal world, we would have enough cooler space, but there's never enough cooler space right now. And we had about 4 skids just packed high with thousands and thousands of tubers this year. So that all goes into the basement of my farmhouse. And it stays about 50 degrees in that basement all winter long. It's nice and dry. So it's just the right temperature that it keeps them cool. We leave them in there. And then we start working with the tubers. Actually, right now, we're starting to pull our tubers out and split the tubers right now. So we'll get everything split up in February and in March. And once we've split our tubers, we pack them back in that same peat moss and we leave them in the basement. And then, usually, kind of mid May, we start bringing those tubers out. This will be our first year having that high tunnel to plant the dahlias in. So we will start a little bit earlier, but typically it's mid May, right after Mother's Day, that we plant the tubers directly out in the fields.
Okay.
So this will be our first year doing them in a high tunnel. We'll probably plant mid-April in the tunnel, and yeah, do a little experimenting. We will be planting lots outside in the field as well. So we'll get a real gauge for timing this year.
Now, do you do any kind of cutting propagation with that, or do you strictly divide tubers as far as increasing your crop?
In the past, we've strictly just divided the tubers, but this is going to be the first year that we are going to try to take cuttings. We've got quite a few tubers that we've produced over the last few years of peaches and cream, which is a variety
Love.
that's, yeah, highly coveted. Lots of people love it. And we have lots of requests. So we sell dahlia tubers every year.
Okay.
And we have lots of requests for that variety, of course. So I'm going to experiment this year, and we're going to do some propagation with cuttings
How
on that
fun.
variety to see if we can build up the stock.
Yeah, how fun. Well, okay,
Yeah,
so with dahlias and selling tubers is one way you can extend your season because
for sure.
then you can generate some revenue in the spring by doing that and dealing with shipping and everything.
Yeah.
Are you is it a big deal for you guys to do shipping? I know sometimes people feel like that's this sort of huge elephant in the room that's hard to kind of tackle because either they're not tech savvy or there's some reason, or they're not near, they have to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours or more to kind of, ship something out. How is that process for you guys?
I can relate to those challenges because I feel like I'm the least tech savvy person ever. I'm the worst with technology. The great thing is there's so many platforms that make it super easy. So we put our website on Shopify a couple of years ago. We moved it onto that, and that's been just the best e-commerce platform, especially for people like me who just don't know how to do these things. So Shopify has made it really simple for shipping. Shipping labels are integrated right into the system, so I can just log into Shopify and print a shipping label for every order, purchase it directly through the website. So that tech end is actually really easy, which is exciting. And we live pretty close to town, so we're able to take our
Okay.
orders into Canada Post almost every day. Although I know in some areas of Canada, Canada Post will actually bring a truck right to your place of business and pick
Wow.
up all your orders, which is awesome. So
Wow.
I was a little intimidated at first with shipping because we do ship tubers all over Canada. And it was definitely a little bit of an undertaking, but I'm just a big fan of jumping in and figuring out the kinks as we go. So the
I
tech
love
end
that.
has not been too bad. It's good that
Yeah.
there's lots of platforms that make it easier.
Well, I love that because sometimes you'll get so afraid they just sort of get paralyzed, and sometimes you just
Totally.
have to roll with it. And and I feel like a lot of times plant people are very forgiving, especially when it comes to technology. And as long as you're communicating, you keep working through the issues. You everyone can be happy. And I
Absolutely.
know that in case someone wants to pursue this, I know that you can't readily ship things from Canada to the U.S.
That's
So
right.
if you are going to start bugging Melanie for shipping here into the States, I'll just go ahead and tell you that you can't do that. And
Sadly, it's
so
not happening.
I
We get requests
know,
all the time, and
I
I wish we
know,
could do it. And
I
I have
bet.
growers in the States who I always am looking at their website and wishing I could buy those tubers to grow those varieties here in Canada. And yeah, it's just not a thing.
Funny. So extension of season. Let's talk about that specifically. So what things do you do or have worked for your business model to kind of help elongate that shortened season?
You bet. So when I first started this business, I had an idea that I was just going to grow these beautiful flowers and sell them at farmers markets. And I very quickly learned in the first year that 4 months of sales in at a farmer's market doesn't mean you can buy groceries in January here in Canada. It just won't cut it.
Right,
So
because
I
let me
really
let me interrupt for just a second, because
sure.
what people don't think about is that, well, you can start planting in May, but I mean it could be 55 or 75 or 80. I mean it can be a long time before you actually have a bloom to cut.
A hundred
So right. So
percent.
okay, go ahead now. Sorry.
Totally. And then by the 1st of October, it's all over with.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so I quickly learned that we needed to flesh this out into a full season business. So we did that in a couple of ways. One way was that we really scaled up with spring production. So in the
Okay.
fall, we plant about 50,000 bulbs here at our farm every year for tulips, daffodils, all those spring bloomers. And that's been key in really getting us some income in April. Starting mid April, we're able to start harvesting thousands and thousands of tulips, and that gives a little influx of spring income. And then we do season extension as far as adding the hoop houses and things like that. But in the broader sense of the business, we've learned that, I mean, gosh, it's cold in Canada like 5 months of the year.
Right.
So we've really had to embrace that. And winter decorating is really popular in Canada. So we've started fleshing our business out that in November, we start offering fresh wreaths and winter planters and urns and all of those beautiful outdoor things. And that aspect of our business has become almost as popular as the flowers that we grow in the summer. It's just been
Wow.
a huge part of our business. So planters for doorsteps, fresh wreaths, things like that. That's really the winter income is almost as significant as anything in the spring and the summer. And that keeps us going essentially right till Christmas. And we have our kind of quiet time in January, which involves a lot of planning. And then by February, March, we're offering those dahlia tubers for sale online. And that's our influx of cash that will keep us moving until we're able to start harvesting again in April. So definitely adding that winter element and that Christmas outdoor decorating has been huge for us.
Well, you definitely see where every season, for the most part, other than maybe a few weeks in January,
For sure.
you're busy doing something. And obviously,
Absolutely.
even those weeks in January, planning is huge to make the most of that shorter season. Just so you don't, I mean, you don't have time at that point. You got to make sure all your ducks in a
Totally.
row.
January is not very glamorous. It is really us sitting in front of computers for weeks with spreadsheets
Uh-huh.
and all of that. You're right, doing all that planning just to make sure that our season is ready to go. And wild enough, we actually spend a lot of January planning next Christmas. So we're currently in the middle of making our orders for containers for next Christmas and pots and all of those things. So that all happens in January.
Well, I love you said that because so many times people shut down and then they
Mhm.
don't think about that and they're like, I'll think about that later.
Mhm.
And then it's fresh in your mind. You know what you had left of, what you needed more of, what you don't need more of. While it's fresh, you can make that plan without having a whole lot of stress because everything's right there handy and it's convenient for sure.
That's such a good point. That's actually how we handle almost all of our growing. When we are placing our orders for tulip bulbs, our crop blooms in April and May. And by the end of May, we're ordering all of the tulip bulbs for the next year because it's right fresh in our mind. We know what's happened, we know what's worked. Very much the same with the dahlias. Once we've harvested our crops and our tubers in October, if we're looking to buy in new varieties and things like that, we're placing
Right.
those orders in October when that's all fresh in our mind as well. So that's exactly it. It's the same with Christmas. We've just went through December. January is when we sit down and hash it all out for next year.
I
It's
love that.
it's taken a lot to figure out that you actually need to plan a year ahead in farming. I'm not a natural planner
Mhm.
by any stretch, so that's been a big learning curve to learn that I need to sit down at the computer and do that planning a year in advance.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I know some people think, oh, you're just wired that way, where
Oh gosh, no.
yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. So I don't know why this question popped in my mind, and I'm sure some farmer somewhere will roll their eyes, but with being as far north as you are, and at some
Sure.
point the ground freezes, when do you
Yeah.
plant your daffodils and tulips?
We plant those usually. So, Canadian Thanksgiving is a little different than the American Thanksgiving. Canadian Thanksgiving is the middle of October, and
Okay.
that's a super busy time for us. So, it's quite a popular time for fresh flowers. So, we always do lots of flower sales sort of that mid October for Canadian Thanksgiving. And then
Hmm.
immediately we go into planting our bulbs. So, it always
Okay.
seems like here in Ontario, there's a sweet spot between the middle of October and the 1st of November, and if you don't get your bulbs planted in those 2 weeks, then who knows what's going to happen? Because we often will get snow by early November. And
Sure.
it's so funny to follow other farmers online. And I have a good friend in Pennsylvania that farms, and I'm watching her out there in the middle of November doing all sorts of things in the field. And I mean, it's frozen here and we have snow. So it seems like that's our sweet spot is those last 2 weeks of October for
I
us
love
to
that.
get everything planted. And
Well,
then and it works
yeah.
out perfect for our customers because by the 1st of November, our customers are asking us for winter greens already. They're already ready to decorate for Christmas. So it's a real quick switching of gears. We finish the planting and then immediately 1st of November we get into Christmas.
Well, that's great because that really allows you the time to really focus on what's important right
For
then. You have that
sure.
little bubble of time, you can knock it out and then move on. Do you have,
Absolutely.
when it comes to holiday, Christmas greenery, all that kind of stuff, do you forage much of that or do you ship it in or do you go, I don't know, maybe you have a license to forage? I don't know how that works up there.
We do two different things. So
Okay.
we're fortunate that the property that our farm is on is actually an 80-acre piece of land. So
Oh,
we
wow.
do have quite a few evergreens on the farm, which is amazing. So we cut there. We do a little bit of foraging as well. I have my spots. I'm always sort of looking when I'm out and about during the
Uh-huh.
year, and then I've
Uh-huh.
got my foraging spots. But we also partner with local Christmas tree farms.
Oh, okay.
So for cutting a lot of our greenery, there's often Christmas tree farms will have spots on their farms where the trees are just a little bit overgrown, that they're too big for Christmas trees anymore.
Right.
So we partner with them and we go in and we cut evergreens in those sections of local Christmas tree farms, which is amazing. It's much less expensive than shipping anything in. And our business is very much based on Ontario grown. So everything that we sell here at our farm is Ontario grown. So it's nice for us to have those local partnerships with farms versus shipping in things. We do have
Sure.
to bring in a little bit of fancy greenery at Christmas,
Okay.
just to get a little bit of a variety. But 90% of what we do is just partnering with those local farms and then going and cutting our own greens.
Wow. That's great because I mean, plus that's really convenient because you can almost cut to
It's
order,
We
or
do.
you
Yeah,
can
we
stockpile when you've got a few minutes at the beginning of November and then hold on to it. And
Yeah, we cut twice a week. So we've got 2 different days during the week that our guys will go out and do fresh cuts. And it's great for the customers because everything lasts so long because it's being all cut fresh like that.
right. Plus, you have a natural cooler, probably just
That's
out.
right. It's so true. We just leave it all outside. That is true. We stack it all outside one of our hoop houses, and
Uh-huh.
then we work creating the winter urns inside the hoop house. We'll throw a propane heater into the hoop house, and then all the greens. The natural cooler is just outdoors.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. That's funny. Um, okay, so I want to go back because sometimes I get confused about this, and not that anyone's asked me this question, but this is for me. When it comes to tulips and daffodils and things like that, going
Mhm.
back to that, I know
Sure.
sometimes people wonder, and I have heard this, where people question how profitable that really is because of the expense of the bulbs. But
Mhm.
when you're buying, would you say 50,000 bulbs, or you're buying this huge quantity, that
That's
probably
right.
that dynamic changes a little bit. Do you mind speaking to that, just the profitability side of that? Because I think sometimes people are missing
Absolutely.
this huge opportunity because, in their head, the numbers don't add up.
Absolutely. So, what I have found, the hard thing about spring bulbs is they are a labor intensive crop. It's a heck of a
Mm-hmm.
lot of work to plant them in the fall. It's nice that here in Ontario, we don't have to do anything to them for 4 or 5 months. We can just leave them. But then once they all start coming on, it's a lot of labor to get that crop harvested, processed. It requires cold storage for the whole crop. So, there is that element to it. So, what we've done to make sure it's
Mm-hmm.
profitable is we make sure to specialize. So we don't
Oh,
grow any
okay.
of the tulips that you could find in a grocery store that are just like the single petal classic varieties. We grow almost exclusively all of the double tulips that almost look like peonies when they open. We grow lots of beautiful parrot tulips. The tricky thing is it's a higher cost up front because the cost of the bulb of a parrot tulip, it's probably 3 times the cost of what like just a standard single petal
Right.
tulip might be.
Right.
So it is a barrier. And I have I have a funny little story that I'll tell you in just a moment about how I made that leap to really upping our spring production. So that is the tricky part. But when it comes time in the spring for these crops to bloom, our customers are just in love with our product because they can't get anything like that anywhere else. You won't find product like that at the local grocery stores. You won't even find product like that at a lot of the local florists. So it's really specialty product, which gives us a niche. So we're able to charge a premium price for it, which is fantastic.
So do you
So,
mind, uh, and if you don't, we'll just edit this out. But
sure.
would you mind sharing? Because like, I don't know, like when you go to a grocery store to buy a tulip versus a florist versus what they get at your place,
Mhm.
like what is the price difference? Because I feel like sometimes people don't do that research.
Absolutely. So at a lot of flower shops, and these prices are all in Canadian, so I don't know how
Okay.
helpful that will
Well,
be.
it's
But
relative.
in
So
a
yeah.
yeah, in a lot of grocery stores, you can buy tulips for maybe $7 or $8 a bunch for a 10
Okay.
stem bunch for just
Okay.
those single petal varieties. So here at our farm, we're charging 25 to $30 for a 10 stem bunch of
Wow.
tulips. Yeah, and it's all those doubles and those specialty tulips, and there's just no comparison as far as looks of it. So the only tricky part is creating a niche where you have customers that are willing to spend
Right.
$25 on a bunch of tulips versus spending $7 at the grocery store. And that all kind of circles back to creating content and connecting with your customers and building a base and a following. And that is a whole other discussion.
Sure.
But yeah, I found that that's been a way that we've added value for sure.
But you have customers that are buying from you the other times that you're producing flowers. So it's sort of like,
Totally.
especially when in the middle of winter, when you think about we're starved for some kind of piece of nature to bring in our home, and then all of a sudden here are these unbelievable tulips. And I feel like too, this is a point that sometimes I feel like people forget is when you're buying a tulip in a grocery store, half the life is already gone. Half that life has
That's
already been
right.
spent, either in another country or another field, on a truck,
Yeah.
sitting in a distribution facility for the grocery store chain, sitting in the grocery store waiting to be sold, being handled by 12 people probably. When they're getting it from you, not only is it fresher, but the
Hmm.
varieties you're growing. I mean, especially like doubles. I feel like a lot of times doubles and parrots just last longer anyway.
They do. And
People
our
forget
customers are
that.
receiving our product, within 24 hours of it being harvested, which is
Wow.
amazing. And a little trick that we have done to make spring extra profitable for us is when I buy in all of our tulips and they arrive at our farm in the fall, we buy in extras and then we sell the tulip bulbs online to our customers.
Oh,
So we
wow.
market it to the customers saying, if you would like to grow some of the really beautiful special varieties that we offer here at the farm that you can't purchase bulbs for through anywhere else, we have them in an online shop and we sell them in that online shop so that our customers are able to plant tulips. And my goal is to always, if we can cover the cost of the entire wholesale order by selling retail those tulip bulbs in the fall, then that bulb cost is already paid for in the fall for me. Then when I go to harvest my crop in the spring, then I'm pulling in profit from it. So I just increase my order in the fall, sell maybe 30% extra of that order to the customers, and that pays the wholesale cost of the bulbs.
Wow.
So that helps.
That was a real value bomb there that you just dropped because how many people are sitting there financing their bulbs, you know, hoping to be profitable on the other side of winter when you've already got yours paid for basically
That's
because
right.
of that. So
And I
what
learned this the hard way too.
okay.
I'll tell you just a quick little story
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
how I learned this because I was one of those farmers previously. So when I was scaling up, when we first started growing flowers, we were growing maybe 5 or 6 thousand tulips a year. And there was just such a demand. We just never had enough. So I knew we had to make the leap from that to growing, say, 40,000 tulips. But of course, that's a ton of money
Yeah.
to
Especially going into the
like
winter.
tens of thousands of dollars, of
Right.
course, which a new farm doesn't have. And this was a real struggle for me, and I couldn't get any banks to offer me a loan. Going in and saying like, "Oh, I'm a young woman in farming and I want to grow extra tulips." No bank was going to give me, I believe me, I tried, but no bank was going to give me tens of thousands of dollars to scale this up. And here's where I was really fortunate. I had a piece of property that my father had left me, a
Mhm.
building lot that he left me when he passed away. And I had to make the investment in my own business and actually had to sell that building lot and take the money from that sale. And I invested it all that year into scaling up to buying, going from 5,000 tulips to 45,000 tulips. So I know that's not a lot. That's not an advantage that everyone can have. I was fortunate that I had that building lot, but that's the struggle of knowing what you need to do and just not having the ability to scale up. I sold that piece of property, took that entire amount of money and spent it all on tulip bulbs that first year, which was terrifying.
I was gonna say how
Um,
scary that must have
it's
been.
yeah, it's you're literally burying tens of thousands of dollars under the ground and then you just sit and you wait for 6 months and hope it blooms. The good news is they bloomed spectacularly. We had an exceptional crop. And I used that opportunity to create a lot of content for my business. When we had just these masses of tulips blooming, I made sure to hire professional photographers to capture the images and do all of that so that I had that content to kind of push my business further. And that was where I learned the trick that I needed to be able to figure out some way to finance buying all of these bulbs as a person who can't get loans for tens of thousands of dollars in the fall. So
Right.
that was the little trick where I learned, okay, let's order extras And then essentially the customers are paying for our bulbs at that point by buying them in the fall. And then we're profiting in the spring.
So roughly how
So
much do you mark those tulips up that you pre-sell?
usually 2.5 to 3 times the
Okay,
cost.
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And
So if
and
a
if,
bulb was 50 cents, usually, $1.50, $2 each, and we sell them in tens.
well, and then there's specialty novelty varieties that are really hard to source.
Totally, that customers can't buy anywhere else.
Yeah, and I would also imagine that there's a degree of pre-selling you can do. Do you have enough
Absolutely.
time to do that? Like in
We
September,
do.
You already know kind of, well, okay, but you
Yes,
place
because
this.
we've placed that order in May.
I just got
Yeah,
saying that, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, no, that's not what you said earlier. So
exactly.
so when do you start the pre-sale for the tulips?
So we place the orders in May, so we get an idea of what we would like to sell. Then we place those orders with our wholesalers in May, and then we pre-sell the tulips in the beginning of September. Customers purchase them online. And then by mid-September, we're needing to pay for the shipments from the suppliers because they're starting to ship them to the farm. But by then, the customers in those first 2 weeks of September have already purchased their bulbs. So that money moves over to paying the bills from the suppliers. And then once the tulips land on our farm in mid-September, then we package everything up. And by 1st of October, we're sending all of those shipments out all across Canada. So customers are getting their bulbs in plenty of time to plant. And then we're free and clear to plant our tulips.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that because
Sure.
I know down here in the South that there's a little bit a slightly different dynamic because um, our cold season is so short that some
Right.
bulbs don't necessarily perform exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Question though, when you're placing those bulb orders and then they're coming in, do you go ahead and order, like, let's say amaryllis for Christmas? I mean, maybe you don't do
Mm-hmm.
amaryllis. Do you do
We
potted?
do.
Okay.
We do. Yep. We order amaryllis for Christmas. Absolutely. And we also sell those bulbs on our website at Christmas time for our customers.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all this because I feel like it just
Sure.
opened up my eyes to a whole lot of things that I'm thinking, wow, this is really great. So
It's all the things I've learned the hard way in trying to flesh this out into a 12-month of the year business while also bootstrapping the whole thing and not having any like outside cash to finance the whole thing. So I'm
yeah,
really happy to share because I know it's a problem that a lot of farmers have starting up.
yeah, yeah. So I noticed on your website, it was interesting. And I realize the images may be older because of COVID,
Mhm.
like certain things didn't happen this year. But I
Mhm.
noticed a lot of other kinds of plant material that was sort of in your retail space.
Yeah,
And I thought to myself, okay, I bet they don't grow that because there's no
you're right.
way, it's not possible. So is that another add-on for you? And how do you approach that and do that?
Very much so. So, an add on that we added about 2.5 years ago was we built a farm store at our farm because we were selling at farmers markets, and it was just so subjective to weather, especially here in Canada. The weather can just be a real
Sure,
gamble.
sure.
So, we built an on farm store just to be able to have, a space to host our customers. And then we kind of realized we could flesh that out into something a little bit further. And what we started doing was sourcing in indoor plants and things
Okay.
like that from other growers to be able to offer to customers, essentially running it like a flower shop that offers Ontario grown product. So we source in all of the potted plants like that from other growers. We're really fortunate here in Ontario that we have an organization called the Ontario Flower Growers Terminal that brings in a bunch of growers from all over Ontario and it connects them with buyers from all over Ontario.
Wow, that's great.
So I'm really fortunate to be able to be a buyer there and I can source product directly from other Ontario growers. So we bring in lots of indoor plants and things like that. And then even just to touch back on things like tulips, where I grow all of the fancy specialty tulips, there are other growers in Ontario that are large scale growers that grow just the single, more simple classic tulips.
Mhm.
And I'll purchase things like that in at the beginning of the season before our crops have started. So I'm buying it all local from another grower. and then offer that to our customers as well, just to flesh out the season a little further for me and still provide customers with Ontario grown flowers.
And it gets
So
their
we've
appetite wet, waiting. And of course,
absolutely,
for flowers,
winter
and
is so long here in Canada that I feel like we need to have these ways to get
oh my
flowers in
gosh,
people's hands earlier. And our customers are really, by February, they're just dying for some fresh flowers in their homes.
I love that. Well, and then too, this is probably not deliberate, but you just think then when your tulips come in, they even look better because they're used to these other tulips, and they look, yeah. I mean,
yes,
that's
it's
crazy.
so true.
How
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah. And it gets them purchasing regularly again, so that it's not, it's not a cold start when things start coming on in mid-April or early May. Customers are warmed up, they're familiar with the farm, they're in the habit, and then we just knock their socks off with all this product by the beginning of May.
It's amazing. I love that. I want to talk about COVID a little bit, and maybe how that's changed some things. When this all happened, you think, and I'm not sure Canada's response as opposed to ours, just because we're just we don't get the neighbors' news. We get to hear all of our hot mess,
yes.
which we seem to have a lot lately. And so this is a dynamic that I think a lot of people don't think about either. So yes, your bulbs may have been paid for because you did the pre-sale on the bulk bulbs, but you're still resting is not the right word, but relying on that investment, the profit
totally.
from the investment in the
Yes.
ground to help cash flow into when the plants you plant in late May bloom in July.
100%.
And so here's COVID happening and things are shutting down. I'm sure there was like some internal freakouts happening in your world. So tell us about that, and tell us about your freakouts, and then
sure.
and then once the smoke or the fog clears, how you tackled it.
Absolutely. So when COVID first really became a thing last year in the middle of March, it was pretty scary because our business also is built on agritourism, really. Not only do we rely on customers coming to the store to purchase our fresh perishable product, but a lot of our customers actually make the drive from an hour and 2 hours away. We're about 2 hours east of Toronto here in Ontario, and a lot of our customers live in the greater Toronto area. So we've built a business that relies on customers typically making weekend trips. They make a road trip of it. They'll come from Toronto on the weekends to purchase flowers here at our farm. So it's very much tourism based. I don't think I can get the hang of keeping these earphones in. So our business is very much tourism based in that sense. And when COVID hit and we were starting to have all of the lockdowns happening here in Ontario in mid-March, all of a sudden we're faced with the fact that we can't have customers come to our store and we have a fresh perishable product to sell. And we're sitting on $60,000 worth of tulips planted out in the ground that are going to bloom regardless of what's happening pandemic wise.
Right.
The tulips have no idea that there's a pandemic. They're just pushing along on their schedule.
Right.
So it was definitely,
they're tucked in bed and they're thinking about bursting forth.
They are, and we're not able to say, okay, can you guys just hold on a second while the world figures things out?
Thank you.
There's no pressing pause.
Right.
They were blooming regardless. So we had to get super creative. Our store wasn't able to be open. So we went to producing a full delivery service almost immediately. We had never offered delivery before because frankly, we hadn't needed to. Our customers just drove to our farm and purchased our product. So within a week, we went from offering no delivery to running a full delivery service. We just put it out online that we were going to deliver our flowers to our customers. We offered free local delivery in our area. And oh my gosh, did we ever have to learn quick on the tech end of things to make that happen? So we went from offering no deliveries to running a business that was doing 150 to 200 deliveries every day, 4 days a week.
Oh my gosh. So
It
what was your
was
radius? I mean, how far? I mean, if
crazy.
people are driving 2 hours to you, you didn't deliver 2 hours away.
Gosh, no. We
There's
kept
no way.
ourselves
Yeah.
within about 60 kilometers, within maybe a 30-minute radius of
Okay.
the farm.
Okay.
We had customers that wished that we would do that 2-hour drive, and I wish we could have for them, but no, it was too crazy. There was no way. So we kept ourselves within 30 minutes of the farm. But what we found was that our customers that were living in the greater Toronto area, that are living far away, they all have parents that live at home here in the Quinte area where we're located.
Okay.
So they started placing orders because they couldn't travel to see their families either during COVID. They started placing
Oh,
all of these orders for delivery instead, because if
like
they can't
gifting.
visit, then they can gift flowers instead.
I love that.
So the delivery service took off like crazy almost immediately. It
Wow.
was it was a real learning curve. The first week that we offered it, we didn't understand the tech end enough to know that we needed to limit the amount of items that we offered per day. So we loaded about 600 arrangements in inventory on our website. We offered our customers 4 different delivery dates, and we thought, we can handle that. That's just about 200 a day. We can do this. Well, 523 customers ordered flowers for delivery the
Oh my
first day.
gosh. Oh my
and we
gosh.
and we had no idea. So we're just figuring out the tech end of this. So it was a Wednesday that was the first delivery. We refer to it as the Wednesday now. So by Tuesday afternoon, we're
Oh
starting to
wow.
realize things are out
Freak
of
out.
control for
Yeah.
Wednesday. Like, it's over 500 deliveries. We did our best and we managed to pull off 400 and something deliveries in that one day. And as a company who's never offered a delivery service, oh my gosh, just like honestly, just about everything that could have went wrong did. It's gotten so much better from there. We've learned to control our inventory. We just post a certain amount of inventory per day now on our website. We're able to complete our deliveries. But that was our big COVID pivot, was offering that full delivery service and then figuring out the mess that was how to actually execute it.
And then you said, did I hear that right? That you did arrangements?
We did, yes.
Because I'm thinking the whole time, like you're just making like a wrapped bouquet or something that you could, drop and go or something like that. But then of course, but now, and so now you have the element of all of a sudden you don't know what to expect, and now you need 500 vases instead of whatever.
We kept it super simple. So
Okay.
our philosophy at the farm here is to keep everything simple. So we just offered mason jar vases.
Okay.
So we just offered our customers a mason jar of mixed flowers. We ended up having to order mason jars in by the skid to complete all of those orders. But we just kept it super simple, and we maintain that throughout this whole delivery service. We just basically offer our customers 3 options. One of them being the mason jar with fresh flowers.
Okay.
Then they can order a medium mixed bouquet of fresh flowers or a large mixed bouquet. So 3 options every week. We give them a photo of what the product is, so they have an idea of what they're purchasing, and we keep it simple like that, which
Wow.
is, I mean, it helps to streamline it for sure.
Wow, that's great. And then you said you use Shopify, I think you mentioned earlier,
That's right.
which I
Yeah.
know is a great. I mean, that alone is worth it. Um, okay, so I'm trying to make sure I'm trying to think. Okay, I'm trying to let people channel questions to me so I know what to ask. So what are your top sellers during your regular season? Because I know with having a shorter season, maybe there's some things you can't grow up there that those of us down here with a long, like, maybe you're not growing 110-day flowers or 145-day flower. Well, not that there is one, now that I'm thinking of that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you also manipulate scheduling what you grow for summer to maximize your turn and your cutting?
For sure. So I am a big fan of just simple, basic cut and come again flowers. So
Okay.
we grow a ton of zinnias here at our farm. They're
Okay.
not the most glamorous flower, but they are the bread and butter of our season here. It gets warm enough. It gets quite hot here in Ontario in the summer. So it's warm enough that they will bloom from kind of mid-July right through till 1st of October for us. And we sell so many of them just in simple mason jars, just in mixed bouquets. That's definitely a staple for us. Sunflowers as well. We plant maybe 5 or 6,000 sunflower seeds every week here at the farm. So we'll
Wow.
start
Okay.
that like beginning of May. And then we'll just do like a good 60-day sunflower. We'll plant those every week right up until the middle of August so that we can have a succession of them blooming all through the summer. So we keep it simple with that. Dahlias are certainly a super profitable crop for us. They start a little later. We don't start getting blooms till kind of mid-August here in Ontario, but we get, if all goes well, this year was just a month of blooms. If all goes well, we'll get a good 2 months of flowers off of those. So we really rely on a lot of those just super easy cut and come again basics.
Sure. So with zinnias, I know that I like down here because we can start them a little early. We really have to almost do 2 successions or maybe 3, depending on how aggressive you want to be. Do you have time for a lot of succession? I mean, with sunflowers you just talked about.
Yeah.
With the other crops, do you have time for that?
We don't. We really don't have time for that here in Ontario. So we just, with our zinnias, with our celosia, amaranthus, typically we'll just do 1 seeding of that, plant those seedlings out in late May, and then work that crop right through till the end of September. Sometimes we'll do 2 successions of things like celosia or amaranthus, but zinnias is just typically 1 seeding, and that crop keeps going all summer long. And then by the time it's really getting on its last legs, that first frost kicks in for us anyway.
And so anything new and exciting you're planting this year that you're really, pumped about?
We're super pumped to scale up on the dahlias.
Okay.
We have, I'm really excited to have
that's a
that new
huge
hoop
jump.
house.
That's a huge jump, like double.
It's a really big jump for us. Yeah, we're selling dahlia tubers, but then we also purchased in quite a few new varieties of dahlia tubers. So we're more than doubling that crop. We're going to be planting it outside and in the hoop house. I'm really doubling down on it, and I'm so excited about some of the new varieties that we'll be able to offer customers in the tuber sales that we do too. So that's the biggest thing we're excited about right now.
Now, do you grow, I know that you can grow pretty much any dahlia up there. The dinner plates and some of the larger varieties that maybe don't produce the same level of blooms down here, up there, do they still produce this at like a high volume where it's worth doing? Or do you try to stay with smaller blooms that are not small, but maybe bloom faster, repeat faster?
Sure. The main focus of the dahlias that we grow here on the farm are the round ball dahlias, which certainly produce a little quicker. They're very prolific, but we love the dinner plates too, and they do produce really beautifully. In the past, I've typically devoted one of our hoop houses to them just because it seems like they need that little bit of extra heat from the hoop house, and they often need that cover to kind of protect the blooms. So last year was the first year that I didn't dedicate a hoop house to dahlias, to the dinner plates, and we did eucalyptus instead. But previously we would usually always grow like Floral, a great big white, and the cafe au laits, that beautiful blush pink. We would grow 1 hoop house full of those. So they need that extra protection here in Ontario typically, but so worth growing. They're so beautiful.
It's so crazy to me that you grow eucalyptus, and I just think of eucalyptus as being so cold sensitive. And I know, we have a supplier of hardy eucalyptus not very far from where I live now. And I know there's varieties that are more tolerant than others. Do yours are they able to overwinter in that high tunnel, or what variety are you growing? I'm just curious because I'm like, I can't believe that you can get that out.
Yeah, so we're growing the silver drop eucalyptus, which is like the tall, like the branchy one. We grew Gunny last year, which is one of my favorite varieties. And we grew Eucalyptus polyanthemus, I believe it's pronounced, which is the big silver dollar ones that have like the large round leaf to them. So those were the 3 main varieties that we grew. I've never tried overwintering them. Typically what we do, we always have to maximize our space here at the farm. So that crop is really in full production by October. It's just stunning. We cut it right down to the ground, sell all the bunches at that point, and then that same hoop house that we've grown the eucalyptus in, that gets transferred over to being the hoop house that we use for all of our Christmas production when we're making all of the urns and things like that. So we end up slapping tables right over the beds that we were previously growing things in and kind of doubling up the space. So I've never had the time to actually play around with seeing what will winter over and experimenting that way because we're in full kind of Christmas mode here at the farm instead.
I understand. Well, I know here we often will get a polar vortex or some real cold
Mhm.
snap that will kill eucalyptus down pretty hard. But then I'm always surprised at established plants, how they come back from the ground, or we
For
end up
sure.
cutting them down to about 3 feet, and then those dormant buds pop out as soon as they warm up, and how it reflushes. But so do you buy, okay, I know I'm asking probably geeky questions at this point,
No,
but
it's fine.
but do you start them from seed or do you buy plugs in? Because I'm just thinking of the short
Yeah.
time, and eucalyptus is one of those things that is kind of slow to start, but then all of a
Takes
sudden,
forever.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. So we do both. So
Okay.
last year we started thousands of seeds in late January and early February here at the farm. And then we also bought in plugs.
Okay.
This year we're doing exclusively seed. We had placed an
Okay.
order for about 2,000 plugs. And actually, just a week ago, that order got canceled on us
Well,
because
no.
I know the grower apparently wasn't able to get the seed. So there's quite a shortage of eucalyptus seed, which I'm hearing is kind of related to all of the wildfires that were happening in Australia last
Makes
year.
sense. Yeah.
Yes, so it's all connected. So our 2,000 plugs got canceled, and I got online that same day and tracked down some more seed. So we'll be doing everything exclusively from seed, and we'll be planting it as soon as it shows up in our mailbox, hopefully soon. So we
So
have to start it real early.
where will you put these seed, like when you plant them? Because it's not heated in the high tunnels. Do you have an
That's right.
area? Yeah.
So, what we have done for years here at the farm is actually start all of the seeds for our farm in my farmhouse.
Okay.
So, I have a room in the downstairs of my farmhouse that we put racks with growing lights and all of that in. And we start probably 15,000 seedlings all in that room.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I feel like what we lack in infrastructure here at the farm, we make up for in ingenuity. So we make it work. This is
Love it.
last year we built ourselves a heated greenhouse. So this is actually our first year at the farm where we have a really beautiful 80-foot heated, proper heated greenhouse. So we'll still start everything inside in my house. We'll start all those eucalyptus seedlings and the earlier things. And then we will get everything outside in the greenhouse and get that fired up probably mid-March or so.
Okay. Okay. Well, obviously you know what you're doing, and I'm so excited for you because I
Thank
mean, you
you.
have definitely shared some surprises for me that I'm like, wow, that's exciting to know that you can manipulate what you do enough to at least uh, do something like eucalyptus successfully on top of everything
For
else, because it
sure.
is a wonderful foliage to go with anything, to do anything. And even for you, if you're cutting it in October, um, to use for winter greenery, if seasonal points of interest and
Totally.
things. So
It's really amazing that here in Ontario we can grow, our eucalyptus crop will be 4 or 5 feet tall by the time we hit
how
first
exciting.
of October, just in an unheated hoop house
Do you
with
pinch it
not
at
a heck
all?
of a I don't.
Okay.
I didn't last year and it
Okay.
was beautiful.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
just throw lots of water on it all
Yeah.
summer long. It loves the water. And as long as we do that, it seems like it produces exceptionally.
I love that. That's great. Well, I always like to ask for a piece of advice as we end this time. And, and I always hate this because I always say this too, but I'm like, you've given so much great insight. But is there any one piece of advice that either someone's given you or you would like to share with our listeners that you think will encourage them or spawn them on to great things?
For sure. My biggest piece of advice is just not to be afraid to get messy and make mistakes. I think so often people are afraid of making mistakes and of
Yes.
failure. And honestly, that's where all the good stuff happens. When you mess things up and when you make mistakes, that's when you actually really learn valuable, valuable things. Some of the best things that I've learned in my business have came from the times that we've had, terrible mess ups happen here at the farm. So I feel like the biggest piece of advice is to get messy, try things as well. I think we get paralyzed as far as just
Yes.
trying new things and we get in our heads. I'm a big fan of jumping in, trying things, making those mistakes and learning from them. I feel like that's where all the really good stuff happens.
Mm. Melanie, thank you so much for this time. I know I shared before we started recording that after we started talking, we had a handful of people that were like, "Oh, you need to interview Dahlia May Flower Farm because we just love following them and the things they do." And then of course no one knew that we had initiated some conversations to do
Sure.
this. And now I look back and I'm like, I'm so glad we did this and we scheduled that. And I'm so glad that you have fans that are going to be so happy to hear your story. So thank
Oh,
you.
I just really appreciate the opportunity to share. This has just been a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to this. So thank you.